Night. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Negotiating for Women 101, How to Get What You Want in the Workplace. I am Ingrid Peterson. I'm the Director of Career Education at St. Michael's College, and I'm excited about our conversation tonight. I wanted to welcome Susan to the discussion and provide just a little background with her. Susan Rietano graduated from St. Michael's in 1983 with an English degree and a plan. After biking cross country with her roommate, Gail Sullivan, she would ace the LSAT, head off to law school in New York City, and become a formidable public defender. For a variety of reasons, not the least of which was Gail's car accident, which abruptly ended their bike trip, Susan's plan was never executed. Instead, Susan, who had never taken a business course, but had studied theater under the Rathgabs and was good on her feet, landed a highly coveted job in big tech. She enjoyed a successful 10-year career, then had 4 children, joined a flexible work startup, did private career coaching, and ultimately, in 2016, co-founded Prepare to Launch You, a learning and consulting company that helps women navigate work-life challenges and transitions. Trained as a negotiator who then trained other negotiators, Susan very famously blew her first opportunity to negotiate for herself. For the 30 plus years since, through her Prepare to Launch You courses and through consulting with Fortune 500 companies, speaking at national conferences and universities, and authoring 3 courses on LinkedIn Learning, she's made sure other women don't make the mistake she made. And tonight, we're happy to have Susan back on campus, well, from her Zoom screen in Connecticut. And she's going to be here to help all of you answer some of your questions and approach your career perhaps in a different way, in a more positive way. I'm going to facilitate our conversation with questions that many of you have submitted in advance. With a very short 45 minutes for our discussion, Susan has graciously volunteered to stay later and answer your questions. So we may go beyond the 7:45 end time for those of you who can stick around to hear some more. If you have urgent questions, you can feel free to pop them into the chat, but I will say I have quite a lot of questions that were submitted in advance. So
they are.
Yeah, we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. So Susan, is there anything you'd like to add? I'm dying of curiosity about that first negotiating.
Yeah, I'll probably start with that. I do want to say what I told you and Angie right at the beginning. And last night I did a workshop for an audience at Northwestern University in Chicago for 2 of their graduate programs. And their questions were just not nearly as good as these questions. So it made me feel really proud that my little college in Vermont was producing smart and thoughtful people. So yeah, we'll start with that story. So as Ingrid said, there was a book that came out in the 80s, The Accidental Tourist. I used to call myself the accidental business person because it certainly was not the path I had trained for or actually ever intended. But I ended up at Xerox Corporation and was fortunate timing wise to get in at a time where there were opportunities for women. Clearly they bent the rules to bring me in. And I was fortunate with timing, just when the market I hit it well. I also worked really hard and I probably had some natural talent. So at a young age, probably like 26 or 27, I was able to interview for a management position and I got it. And I think at the time there were maybe 1 or 2 other managers nationally that were as young as I was. The Northeast was kind of the first to take this jump into young managers. And so for those of you who work in the corporate world, your salary is based on your grade or your band level. And because I was so young in the company, my grade was very low. I'd made a lot of money because I had high incentive compensation. So I got this job and I took a huge pay cut, but I didn't really care. It was still more money than I'd ever thought I would make. And I got to be a boss. So a year after I had my first year of management, my friend Sherry joined and she became a manager on the same staff. So now she's 27. And then a full year later, now my 3rd year as a manager, our friend Pete, the 3 of us had been in the same executive training program, joined us. And about a week into the assignment, Pete's first week on the job, beginning of my 3rd year, the beginning of Sherry's 2nd, he said, "Hey, I want to take you guys out to lunch. I'm just trying to figure this thing out. This seems kind of weird." So we're sitting at the luncheonette, and he says, "You guys realize how much how little money you make. And we're like, yeah, it really stinks. But, career wise, it's a great move. And eventually we're going to get our grade levels up. And it's, once we move up, we're going to make a lot more money. He said, did you ever ask anybody why, it was so low? Did you ever even question it? And we're like, no. His second day on the job, Pete could see that there was something wrong, that he would take such a big pay cut to take a management position. So he made an appointment with compensation with a woman named Rose. And he asked Rose to create a scattergram to show nationally what managers were making in these positions. Mm-hmm. And we weren't even on the chart. So here's the bottom of the chart, and our dots were below the line. So we were actually being paid illegally by the company's standards. So in that one day, he met with our senior manager, was a VP at the time, made the case, and we all got huge raises. But Sherry and I kind of looked at each other like, wow, we didn't even think to ask. And that was the day that I realized no one is looking out for my compensation but me. If it hadn't been for Pete, who very graciously brought us along with him, I would have been underpaid for half of my career significantly. And if I hadn't left when I had my children, I would have been underpaid in perpetuity. So I learned a very hard lesson then, and that was ask questions and be your own advocate. It wasn't that Xerox executives were behaving unethically, or that they had singled me out, or I was feeling the victim of some kind of punitive exercise. Nobody was looking. And that's often why you're not getting paid as much. Nobody else is looking out for you. You have to look out for yourself. So I have tons of stories, and I like to just kind of weave them in because I think they give good examples. So Ingrid, if you want to kind of tee me up with some questions.
Sure.
I could talk all night. I've got tons of stories.
Sure.
Yeah.
Another question on the list: how do you assert your ideas as a woman in the workplace? How do we address mansplaining, misogyny as it is taking place?
I like this question because, you don't know misogyny if you didn't work in the 80s in big tech. And my first boss asked me what kind of underwear I wore. So, I come from a totally different, right? So how do you navigate that? So I have found over the years that the best way to navigate this, and this is going to rub some of you the wrong way, is with a little bit of humor. So we tend to take ourselves so seriously, especially if we're in a role that's dominated by men. If we're in tech, if we're in big law, if we're in finance, if we're in fields where there are typically more men represented than women, we go in guns a-blazing and we're kind of serious. So I find that sometimes humor. So if somebody mansplains to me, I will make a joke and I'll say something like, oh my God, Pete, it's amazing what women can do. I knew that already. And usually so now I don't come across as, a bitch. I can't think of another word. I don't come across that way. And he's put in his place in a kind of friendly way. So that's one strategy. The other strategy is just to completely ignore it. And that's to kind of just talk over them, walk around them, and ignore. So those are the two strategies. The other piece I would encourage is to not look for it. And I had a sign in my office back when I worked at Xerox, and it said, catch me doing something right. And I kept that sign for when I became a parent. I had 4 children. They're very close in age. And it was so easy to find them doing the things that I knew they would do wrong. And it was so easy as a manager to find the things that I knew my employees would be doing that were wrong. Likewise, it's very easy to find those men who do those things that are wrong. But I try to live my life by finding the things that they do right, because if we encourage the good behaviors and thank them for their advocacy, or ask them for their advocacy, or privately pull them aside and say, you know what, John, I know you were trying to help me there, but that kind of made me feel yucky. If you don't think I know something, pull me aside and ask me if I don't know, but don't do it publicly because it just makes me feel like I'm kind of lame. That's a strategy I always use, as opposed to coming at it in a combative way. So 3 of my children are boys. 2 of them are out of college and now working. My younger 2, my daughter and my other son, are still in school. And when my second son entered the corporate world, my first son is in the more creative track. And he's like, sometimes I don't know what I can say, what I can't say. I don't want to say anything. We don't want young men coming into the workplace feeling like they can't say anything for fear of making a mistake. I think the key is that when a mistake is made, we handle it kindly, empathetically, and firmly. And if you can throw a little humor in, I find that's helpful too.
Mhm.
So,
I think there were a couple of questions in here about self-confidence. Now,
mhm.
clearly, just in the short time that you've been talking, Susan, we can see you have a lot of self-confidence.
Yeah.
But as young women are coming out of college or out of graduate school, where does that self-confidence come from to be able to have those kinds of conversation with your
Yeah,
coworkers?
it's a great question. It comes from knowing who you are. And I that sounds so general, but it's so important to really know what's important to you, what lines can be crossed and what can't be crossed, to understand not only what work do I want, but what do I want from that work, understanding your values, your priorities, and understanding your brand. So, for instance, I run a lot of stuff. I'm on a lot of boards. I can do the books if I have to. You don't want me running your books. It's a hot mess. Can I do it? Yes, but I would never pitch myself as that. So, really understanding what you do well. And as women, we tend not to do that. I was just working with a client right before this call. She's in San Francisco. She works in tech. She's so highly accomplished. And we were working on her elevator pitch. And she's like, I can't say that. That sounds too boastful. I can promise you that maybe 1% of you will ever come across as too boastful. You will almost always come in as under boastful. And I think if you want to play on the big field, you have to own your accomplishments and present them boldly. About, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe 20, I was working for the flexible work company, and we did consulting. We helped companies set up flexible work policies, but we also worked with people to help them find flexible jobs. Most of them were women, but sometimes there were men. And one day I interviewed a man who worked at the Aetna, a big insurance company, and he was looking for a new job, and he wanted to work flexibly. I forget why. And he was telling me all about this project. That was his idea, and it was groundbreaking because they were totally transitioning the way claims were processed in insurance, and they were using a digital platform. So this was back before everything was done digitally. And it was his idea, and he led the team, and he hired the staff, and he worked with the outside sources to bring them in and vet them. And he was successful, and he came in on time and under budget, and blah 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 blah. And it was all sunshine, unicorns and rainbows. And I thought, wow, this is really impressive. This is a great project. So I made some notes and I filed his file away. And about 2 months later, at this time I was interviewing probably 10 or 15 people a week. So a lot of times I'd forget someone after a month or two. So about 2 months later, I interviewed a woman who also worked at the Aetna, which has tens of thousands of employees at the time.
Mhm.
And she told me about this project that she'd work on, and she was part of the team, and she helped put the strategy together. And she, sometimes worked with the outside sources, and she helped bring the resources together. And she was really proud that they had accomplished their goals on time, and they come in on budget, and that the results were really good. And I was like, okay, it's kind of cool. And I wrote it. And that night I was lying in bed and I woke up. My office was in my home right here, actually. And I was like, that story that woman just told me today sounds so familiar. And I came down to my office and started digging through my files. I pulled up this man's file from 2 months earlier, and I looked at them. They were on the same team, on the same project, with the same people and the same outsourced people and the same results and the same budget. And the way they told their stories was so different. And the way I heard it was so different, because when I looked at my notes on his file, it was like, wow, this guy's gangbusters, fantastic. And I wrote on hers, good administrative skills, good team player. I mean, it was like, oh my God, they were the same. So just remember that what you feel is boastful is necessary. When you're out trying to interview or trying to convince your boss to give you a raise or a promotion, you have to be boastful. That's the whole idea. Now you can use language and use measurable accomplishments to tell your story, as opposed to just saying I'm great. But
Mhm.
your job is to be boastful. And I promise you, most of you aren't being boastful enough.
Probably very
Yeah.
true. Probably very true. You've mentioned having a lot of different connections. What would you suggest is the best way for people to build a network as they're,
Yeah.
starting their career, going through their career, and then, tapping into that network as they go along?
Yeah. So your network's everywhere. I believe in having a virtual and a live living network. I can't emphasize enough the importance of having a LinkedIn profile that's robust and convincing and compelling. Um, if you limit your network to just people you feel comfortable with and know already, you're really cutting yourself short. You are selling yourself short. You need to reach and be pretty bold in your connections. So I recommend a couple of strategies. Number one, you're always looking for a job. Even when you're not looking for a job, even when you're in the job you love, you are always looking for a job. And if you keep that mindset, your network will always be up to date. It will always be robust. Your resume will always be up to date. It will always be telling a compelling story. And you'll always have the confidence that if you can't get what you want where you are, that you have options to go elsewhere. So your network becomes the place where you can explore and assess. One of the questions we saw, Ingrid, was about pivoting. And exploring and assessing is a great strategy to use mid-career, during a happy experience, or when you're unemployed and looking. And it's just putting feelers out there to understand what people do and exploring industries that interest you, exploring fields and functions that interest you by talking to people and asking them what they do. People enjoy nothing more than talking about themselves. So making a reach out to say, you know what, I'm working in finance, but I really love working with words. And I kind of went to finance because my dad said, oh, you're good at math, or my professor said you're good at math, so go into finance. But I really want to get into marketing. How should I do that? Well, the best way to do it is to talk to people who've done it. Find out, what does it require? Is there licensure that I need to get? Do I need to get another degree? Maybe something I can do on the side, either through online learning like LinkedIn or continuing ed in my community, or maybe just taking on some volunteer projects at my current employer can help me make that pivot. So the network serves many functions. That example I just gave is to help inform you when you may want to make a change. Of course, it's the conduit to connecting you to other people for jobs. So I'm a big believer in continually adding to your LinkedIn network meaningfully. You know, you don't want to link with scary guy from high school reunion, or someone who's trying to sell you something, or there's like always the guys from Nigeria or Eastern Europe that are always on there that are trying to connect and get your money. You know, I think most of you will be able to discern who's worth connecting with and who's not, but don't just wait for the invitations. Think about industries that interest you. Think about companies that interest you. Go to their LinkedIn pages. Look for, did somebody graduate from St. Michael's there? Is somebody in my local community there? And connect with those people. So, and then on the live side, which of course is not really happening now because we're not seeing people, don't discount the people that you meet at the bus stop, the people that you meet on the sidelines, the people in your faith communities or on your kids' soccer teams. Make sure that you're just always asking people, what do you do for a living? What kind of work do you do? We tend to separate our lives too much. And those people on the sidelines have jobs too. Many of them could be, or maybe are, in careers or fields that might be your next spot. So ask those questions and then follow up with a connection.
Yeah. Okay. Curiosity will take you a long way.
Yeah. And people love to talk about themselves. So ask.
Absolutely. So there was a series of questions that I kind of grouped into this category that I called navigating perceptions and misperceptions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to read this question. There's a little story here. Recently, while working on a team on a project for a client, we were asked to complete anonymous feedback for each other. On my feedback, I was labeled as bossy, overbearing, and controlling by the rest of the team. Upon meeting with my boss and reflecting on the session, he thinks they are threatened by my strong presence. This is a team of 4 other women and 1 man. How do I work to change the perception from bossy to strong, competent leader as a woman?
Okay. Well, it is interesting. I think that sometimes women are each other's own worst enemies. And part of that's because scarcity breeds competition. And when we know, even though it's not necessarily true anymore, but it's been just so kind of melded into our souls that there's only one seat at the table. And if you know there's only one seat at the table, why would you help the other women get it if you want it? Right? So scarcity breeds competition. I think we need to accept that there is room and there are more seats at the table and that we can help each other and that we need to help each other. So I'm a big believer in, first, these 360-degree perspective, strengths and assessments are fantastic. In this case, it sounds like the person heard this from more than one person. So I want to just tease it out a little bit. When you hear one thing from one or two people out of a group, then you probably can dismiss it if you're not hearing it from the group at large. You may want to take the 2% truth, which is, okay, a couple of people on my team think I'm bossy and aggressive. Maybe I should check that a little bit. If in this case, it sounds like perhaps the majority of them are saying that, then I think it warrants a conversation, both an internal conversation and also a conversation with the group. So right now, because we're doing a lot of our work on Zoom, a great practical tip would be to just record your next meeting and watch it afterwards. Because when I'm conducting a meeting, I always, like right now, I'm looking at the green light because I want you to think I'm looking at you, even though I can't see any of your faces. When I look at Ingrid, I'm looking down here. It's just not as engaging. So if I'm running my team meeting, I may not be looking in your eyes. You may have your camera off like Angie and Caroline do, or is it Emily?
Emily
and Angie do, right? So I can't see them. So taking the opportunity to record a meeting and watch yourself. How are you displaying yourself? If other people's faces are on there, look at them, see how they feel. Empathy will go a long, long way. Empathy is probably the most important part of management and probably in just about any other social interaction as well. And then ask questions. I know for my very first 360, when I was that very young manager, I can't even remember what it was, but it was something that wasn't good. And I just sat down with them and I said, I really want to be the best manager. I want our team to be the most high performing team, and I'm falling short. And we're a small team. So I'd like you to tell me. I'd like you to tell me how I can do it better. You'd be surprised how honest people can be if they feel comfortable, if they know there won't be any repercussions. I have a problem with the word bossy because that tends to be a word only used for women. My daughter, she has 3 brothers, has a sign in her room that says, I'm not bossy, I'm just helpful. I think also the spin, like in this case, it sounds like the spin was negative. Bossy doesn't have to be negative. We need people to tell us what to do sometimes. So make sure that you're not reading in to the critique or the description, because if a man received feedback that said he's controlling and he's aggressive, he might not consider that to be a negative. So make sure that you're not reading into the feedback, that you are taking the truth from the feedback, doing your best to explore to clarify the feedback and explore what you might be able to do to create some improvements for yourself. And these aren't really negotiating questions, but a lot of them do come down to negotiating is standing your ground, understanding where you stand versus where the other person stands, knowing who you are, and knowing what line you can cross and what lines you won't.
How can women advocate for themselves effectively without negatively affecting their interpersonal relationships at work? So if someone is a fairly direct person, how do they navigate that being direct with also being seen as a team player?
Yeah, I mean, nobody's not seen as a team player because they're talking about themselves. Think about the context. So if you're in a group meeting, that's probably not the best place for you to toot your horn, but you should not be waiting once a year to sit down with your manager and talk about your accomplishments. You should always know where you stand in 2 ways. You should know where you stand because you are studying your results. And if you don't know how you are evaluated right now, if there's anyone on this call who does not know exactly how they're going to be evaluated for their performance, then you need to have a conversation with your boss tomorrow to say, I just want to make sure I understand exactly what your expectations are of me and how I'm going to be measured. So assuming you've got that covered, you should always know where you stand. We are such a data-driven economy right now. You know what percentage of your plan you are. If you're expected to bring in a forecast, how accurate was your forecast versus your actual? If you work in human resources and you have a head count, you need to recruit this many people, or you need to keep compensation to this bucket. We all have those standards. So make sure you know where you are relative to your expectations. If you know that information then you should be having regular conversations, casual conversations, and conversations that you initiate with your boss to talk about your performance. That should never, ever be taken as anything other than positive. The only place it could be negative is if you're doing it in a large group. It's probably not the best place for you to call attention to yourself.
Mhm.
I would imagine that the person who wrote that question is hearing this voice in her head. And you have to be very careful to tease out what am I telling myself? Excuse me. I'm sorry. She's very attached to me. Come here. I gave instructions. This is COVID. I gave instructions to keep her out of here, but I guess they're busy. I'm sorry.
You didn't give the instructions to her, though.
I know. She's just such a sweet old dog. She wants to be here. So there's the proper time and place for delivering this information, but just there are these mind saboteurs, and one of them is I don't want to call attention to myself. I want to be the good girl who sits in the room and gets all A's. It's not like that. If you're in second grade and you get all A's, you're going to get a nice report card, but you have to advocate for yourself. As a former manager, and I had a big team, I couldn't possibly remember where everybody was all the time. And so the people that reminded me actually were doing me a favor. Ingrid, look, I just want to sit down with you and talk to you, and just make sure you saw this email that I got from this client that was really, really happy with my service, whatever it is. And don't assume that your boss saw that email, not because your boss is mean or careless, but because they're busy. And so you have to rely on your voice. You have to be the one reminding and talking about your accomplishments. And let me tell you something, most of the other people and probably all of the men on your team are doing it. Mm-hmm. So I would say for that short answer is just get that out of your head and continue doing it. And don't be ashamed about it. There's no shame at all in self-promotion. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the lifeblood of your career.
Right. So how are you able to, how should you approach making sure that you're fairly compensated in comparison to your colleagues, particularly your male colleagues?
So it starts right at the beginning. I have a niece who went to Boston College. She traveled. She finished top of her class. She had an internship in New York City for PR, and she had another one in Boston. And she got a job at a really nice PR firm in Boston. She was so excited. And she loved her job. She loved her team. She was so happy. And about a year after she started the job, I got a phone call. She was like a hot mess, tears, like hysterically crying, because Patrick, a boy who also went to BC and sang in her a cappella group, who was an average student and had no PR internships, had just gotten a job at her firm. And at first she was really happy to have this friend at her firm. Mm-hmm. And about a week into the job, they had lunch together, maybe it was a month. And he said something about like, yeah, really hard to like afford rent here in Boston at $62K, huh? And Kaylin was like, she didn't say anything to him. She's like, oh my God, I make 56. So the hysteria on the other end of the phone was, she was furious at Patrick. She was furious at her boss. And I let her get all the fury out. And then I was quiet. And you can tell I'm a talker. So when I'm quiet, actually my family listens, because that means I actually have something important to say. I said, Kaylin, don't be mad at your boss. And don't be mad at Patrick. If you have to be mad at anybody, be mad at yourself, because you didn't ask. Patrick asked. Think about it. If you're buying something, or if you're selling something, what's a better, you're selling your sofa from your dorm room, and somebody comes over and offers you $200 when you would have accepted $150. You're going to tell them you'll accept $150? No. We all want to keep as much money as we can. So you have to ask. You have to always ask. So I actually wrote these things down. These are my little key things on negotiating, because I want to make sure I didn't miss any. Everything is negotiable. It may not be negotiable in the way you want it to be, but there is wiggle room in every offer, and you have to go into every offer knowing that. Number two, you will only be successful in your negotiation if you're prepared. So, Ingrid, you asked if what happens if you want to know if you're paid equitably compared to your male counterparts. Unless you have a company that's full transparency on pay, you're never going to know that.
Yeah.
So instead of comparing yourself to him or her, compare yourself to you. What do you want to get out of this negotiation? What's important to you? Understand in the industry, what's the range. You may find people in your company who are willing to share what they're making. Most people won't. It continues to be kind of a very personal discussion. Never, ever, ever, even if it is your dream job and you would do it for free, never accept an offer on the spot. And that means even if you're being promoted in your company, you can accept the position, but you don't accept the financial offer without taking 24 to 48 hours to think about it. So I actually said to Angie before we got on, one of the exercises I use in one of the courses that I teach, it's a returning to work after taking a break course, is a negotiating template. It's 2 pages. I'm going to give it to Angie so you guys can take this if you want. I find that women like to have boxes to check, right? So this is really helpful. But basically what it takes you through, and I'll just kind of navigate you through it right now. You have to first, when you're negotiating for anything pay-wise, remember that your offer is so much more than your pay, than your salary. So if you consider all of the components, some of the ones that I write in this document, it's pay, which is your base salary. It's incentive compensation, which could be a bonus, which could be commission, your other incentives like stock ownership, employee stock ownership, a piece of the pie if the company goes public, profit sharing. So all of those pieces need to be considered. Health benefits. If you are a single mom, or if you're just a mom whose spouse doesn't have benefits, or maybe doesn't have a great benefit plan, a rich benefit plan in this day and age is a huge piece of your compensation, especially if you know how much it costs to buy them on the free market, which is a lot of money. Vacation. Some companies are very stingy with their vacation. I remember when one of my sons was entertaining an offer, I was just shocked at how many vacation days he got. They had 25 company holidays. It's like, oh my God, that's more than some people get in total weeks of all vacation. So look at that. Look at your work schedule. One of my guiding principles, because I have this expertise in flexible work, is that flexibility, I mean, part-time hours, remote work, job sharing, compressed work week, whatever it is. Flexibility is compensation. It is not an accommodation. You are never asking your boss, oh, pretty please, can I work part-time because I'm really so stressed out. I can't get my job and the tears. You never, ever do that. You are always negotiating for flexibility as part of your compensation. So if you're entering a company and you're a young woman who doesn't have a child yet, but you foresee a future with children, the fact that they have a great and robust flexible work policy might be a really big thing for you. So look at that. And look at other things. If you live in a big city, this client that I was working with today in San Francisco, parking is so expensive there. Public transportation in New York City, parking is even more. But even public transport can be very expensive. So if you're paying $300 or $400 a month to park your car, or $300 or $400 a month to take public transportation, and you have a commuting stipend or a parking stipend, I mean, that could be $5,000 a year. So the first part of becoming informed about your pay is understanding every piece of it and using this little template to write it all down. And then looking at it and saying, okay, well, I know I'm not going to accept the first offer because I know there's wiggle room because Susan told me there's always wiggle room. And you're going to look at this and say, what matters most to me right now? What mattered most to me at 25 was very different than what mattered to me at 35 when I had 3 of my children. And then at 45, as they were there in school. And now at 55, I'm actually over 55, but at this point in my life, when they're going off to college, my priorities have changed. So taking a look at that offer and saying, all right, I want to ask for more. I'm going to start with money because that's important, but I'm going to look at all these other things too. And one of the things that you sent me, Ingrid, somebody said, well, what happens if I'm asking for more money and the company has a freeze on salary increases? And you're going to see that a lot right now because we're in a pandemic and an economic crisis. So then you look at other stuff, and this strategy works really well. If you use this language, say, I'm going to pretend you're my boss, Ingrid. Ingrid, I totally get it. I had a feeling you're going to answer that. So what can we do to reward me for the extra work that I'm doing and for the excellent performance I had last year? And now I'm making it our problem. It's not my problem. It's Ingrid's and mine. We're going to work together. We're in the same boat. We're a team. And now I've got Ingrid thinking, okay, Susan has just reminded me that she had a really good year and she's working a lot right now because her kids are in college. So she's available all the time and helping pick up the slack of the team. So I'm reminding her of my worth, and I'm giving her an opportunity to work with me to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ingrid may not have any ideas because she's just stuck on the fact that she can't give me a raise. So I'm going to say, well, you know what, Ingrid, I think one thing we could do is maybe look at my my incentive compensation. You know, I get a bonus for, you know, every time I meet my goal. Well, maybe we could just up that a little bit, or maybe we could bring my goal down a little bit so that the income comes in. Or another example, well, you know what? Because I've been working so much, I've realized that I need more time to recharge if I'm going to be working like this intense schedule. So let's take a look at my vacation schedule. Let's look at maybe adding 2 weeks to that. Your boss has flexibility to do these things. And if he or she does not, they can go to HR. They don't want to lose you. And this brings me to the really foundational point which is if you are not meeting or ideally exceeding your targets, if you're not checking all those boxes, you have no leg to stand on.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have ultimate control over some of these negotiations by your performance. The more that you can make yourself indispensable to the organization, the better time you're going to have. If you can make yourself an expert on something, maybe something slightly ancillary. So let's say your company is embracing a new CRM. CRM systems help you manage your client relationships. Maybe you become the guru. You take a couple of LinkedIn courses online, or maybe you get Salesforce certified, which is a short-term course on your own to become even that much more indispensable, because now you've got the skill set that everybody needs. Think about the ways that you can make yourself so important to the organization that they're going to do whatever they can not to lose you.
Mm-hmm.
So this template is very helpful to help you organize the facets of an offer and to kind of make little check marks over at what's most important.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second page kind of talks you through the language that you use for making that counter offer. And it's interesting because when I first started coaching and teaching in this, I didn't have a lot of templates and scripts, but I found that people were recording me all the time and like writing stuff down that I said. So scripting is very helpful. Practice is very helpful. If you're not comfortable doing this, record yourself on a Zoom screen or do it with your spouse or your sister or your older child. Practice it until it rolls off your tongue, because a good negotiator on the other side of the desk is going to know if you're faking it and you really don't feel it. So I think this will be helpful. We'll make sure you get this. Okay.
Great, thank you. And we'll get that distributed to everyone who's
Sure.
on the call tonight. Thank you very much, Susan. So there were a couple of questions that referenced COVID-19 and how the workplace has changed. What are your thoughts about salary negotiation during the pandemic? Someone was laid off from a job and is in a position where she's considering positions that pay less than what she had been making. What kind of negotiation can you enter into in that situation when, you know, chances are you probably really need that job? So
Right. So there's a couple pieces of that. I would not approach negotiating in COVID any differently than I would in boom times. And that's because you don't really know how much money that your company has. Unless it's a really small company, you understand the bottom line completely. You don't really know what's available. And if you go in sheepishly thinking, I know it's a pandemic and I know we don't have a lot of money and look at my face, who's going to pay me any more money when I negotiate like that, right? So you want to go in from a position of strength, regardless, because again, if you are a person of import, if you are a performer, and they don't want to lose you, they're going to work really hard to keep you. If you are a candidate that they really want, they're going to work to try to recruit you. So to the person who says that she's looking at jobs that pay less, don't assume just because the printed salary band is lower than what you want to make, that's all you can get.
Mm-hmm.
I know this. I'm old. I've been doing this for a long time. There is almost always some other money, or using this template some other way to get you what you want and need. Does that mean that you might not have some dips in your income and maybe even your responsibility level along your career? No. In fact, one of the biggest boons, I think, to women in the workplace is the millennials, because they're coming in with money not being their top priority for the most part. They're very mission driven. They also tend to want to look for opportunities. And as a result, organizations are becoming flatter. When I joined the workforce, there was a career ladder and we all climbed up. And now it's a career lattice. And we're expected to kind of make lateral moves. If we're pivoting, a lot of people are pivoting. Sometimes when you make a pivot, you have to step back a little bit because you're no longer an expert. So if you love the job, if you love the company, you love the culture, if you go back to that first thing I said, knowing who you are and this job meets it honors your values and it meets the priorities that are important to you, which may be something as simple as a shorter work week or the ability to continue to work remotely after COVID ends, then take it. Take it boldly, but don't take it without asking for more money. Always ask for more. Yeah.
What do you have to lose?
Exactly. I'm glad you said that because I had a client, a personal client right now. She was not a student, who had taken a 14-year gap. And during the 14 years, she had done like PTO volunteering and youth lacrosse volunteering. So nothing too sexy, but we were able to kind of build it up and make it look pretty good on the resume so that she didn't have a big blank spot since 2006. So she ended up getting an offer for her dream job. And she emailed me and she said, I know I'm not supposed to take it. So I didn't take it, but now I'm like panicking because this is my dream job. And I said, well, what do you mean you didn't take it? She said, well, I just told them that I'd have to think about it. I said, great, that's what you do. So no one's going to not hire you because you want to think about the offer, right? So we went through the offer and it was a generous offer. And I said, well, you need to ask for more. Where do you think you want more? And she said, everything is pretty good. I would ask for more money, but I just don't think I should get more money. This is a really good offer. I've checked Glassdoor. I've checked all my sources. I said, well, it's not going to hurt to ask. So she asked. And then she forwarded me the email that the VP, she would not report to the VP, but the VP in her division sent her. And it was a woman. And I loved that it was a woman because she said, Debbie, I am so happy you asked for more money. Most of the women who walk through here don't. And I was so sure that you, of all people, having been out for 14 years, landing this great job, would never have asked for more money. So I went to HR and I got the most, or compensation, I got the highest I could possibly get in this offer. So I can't offer you more money, but you have like a big gold star next to your name for asking. So, and I reminded her, I said, I want you to keep that. I want you to frame it. I asked her to send it to me so I could share it with our students and clients. Nobody is going to not hire you because you ask for more money. In fact, I would say that in virtually any job that you take, and I'm talking whether you're working in a physics lab or selling computers to companies or cloud, I guess is another big thing. You have to know how to negotiate. Even if you're a purchasing agent, you got to negotiate for the cheapest price on that widget for your company. If you're working in the physics lab, you've got to pitch your concept to the people at the table that are pitching this, that are going to adopt your proposal to make this new drug appeal or application. Whatever it is, there's just no place where you don't have to negotiate. So if I'm interviewing you and you're now playing a little hardball with me, I'm going to think, oh, good, this is good for me to know because this person's going to be doing this on my behalf, on my company's behalf soon.
Right.
So it's just really important to remember that you've got to be confident asking and that no one ever is going to say no because you asked.
So there were a number of questions asking about supporting other women in the workplace. One of the questions, what can I, as someone who has been in the workforce for many moons, do to support and encourage women who are newcomers or returners to the workforce?
I love that. I love hearing that. Just like the example I just gave with this client, Debbie, with this woman, the senior VP who sent her that nice email. You can be a mentor. You can be vocal. If you are still working and you're on the later part of career and you're probably, no one's going to fire you. You've got too much tenure or too much seniority, or you're just too valuable. Call people out for doing the wrong things. Call the guy out in the meeting who's mansplaining. Call the person out who's not supporting. Ask, gee, did anybody consider a woman for this job? promote the women, and I mean that metaphorically and literally, within your organization. But I think if it had to be one thing, Ingrid, it would be mentor. And that means not just for one person. And don't just wait for someone to ask you to mentor, offer to mentor. Sit down with someone and say, you know what, Ingrid, you got to work on this. You should be moving now. You're ready for a promotion. You're ready to be looking at that next level. We aren't the best at doing that to each other. Part of it's because women tend to be more busy, and certainly no more busy than now. But you always have time for a quick phone call, for a quick chat to say, this is what you need to do. So I would say mentoring is probably the best thing that someone like this woman could do. I love that question. Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
We are at 7:48, so we're a couple of minutes over.
Mhm.
Is there anything, Susan, that you were hoping that we would touch on that we haven't yet?
Well, yeah, I do have a couple if you guys want to stick with me. I gave you like the first couple of tips, the first 3 tips on general negotiating, but the other piece is successful negotiators care, but not too much. So if I know that you are dying for this job and you've told me this, and you've got to, you don't have food on the table. I mean, hopefully I'd have a heart enough to want to give you more money anyway, but you have to care, but you can't let your guard down. You can't care too much. And that requires that you have a B plan. So every time you're looking at anything, you're looking for, what can they give me that's a nice midway point, that's a nice concession. And always, always acting, even if you don't, acting like you have other options. There's great power in your boss thinking you're looking. So I had another client today who was panicked about updating her LinkedIn profile because she was afraid her boss might find out. And I was like, well, what do you care? Well, what if he thinks I'm looking? I said, it's great if he thinks you're looking. You're a top performer. If he thinks you're looking, he's going to panic and start doing more to make you happy. There's nothing wrong with looking. The men I work with are always looking for jobs. You should always be looking for a job. Your resume and your LinkedIn profile should always be updated, and your LinkedIn should always be active. You should always, always be looking, because actually the best way to get the best opportunity, either where you are or elsewhere, is to have many opportunities. So a lot of people will come and they'll say, gee, I'm interviewing for this job, and I know they're going to ask me where else I'm interviewing, and I'm really not interviewing anywhere else. So I have a great line for that. So it's a great thing to weave in. So when you're talking to this company and when you're kind of closing out the interview, to say something like, Ingrid, I'm in the process with a number of other companies in the tech world. But I got to say, I've been so impressed with your company. I really hope this moves forward, because I really like what you had to say. So how does that make you feel as a hiring manager, Ingrid?
Empowered to keep you around.
Exactly. It's kind of like it's like dating, although I've been married for 35 years, so I don't really know much about dating anymore. But it is. It's kind of like people always want the thing that other people want. So
Right.
Now, in that particular case, the line that I gave this to a candidate who was not interviewing anywhere else, but she wasn't lying, because she was in conversations, meaning she had written cover letters and exchanged emails. But that one statement reframes her as someone who's in demand.
Right.
Very powerful. So have your B plan. Always aim higher than what you want. A good negotiator on the other side of the table is going to come back with a counter. Make sure that you start higher than when you think you're going to be. If someone asks you in an interview how much you're expecting to make, first of all, that should never happen in a first interview, because you don't know enough about the job or the opportunity or the company to make any type of pitch. So that's the way you answer it. You know what, Ingrid? I really haven't thought about that right yet, because I'm just kind of getting to know the opportunity. I have earned in a range over my career. I've had some really great years. I've had some not so great years. I'm looking to replicate those great years, but I think it's early for me to come up with a number, because I'd like to really understand the scope of the responsibilities first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but let's say it happens later in the interview, and you can't really get around that, because now you know the scope of the job and you've been there long enough. The best way to handle that is, you know what, I really haven't put a number to it yet. Why don't you tell me what the range is? Throw it right back at them. And then whatever they say, whatever the range is, the high range is acceptable to you. So you just say something, that's great. The higher end of that range sounds like it could be workable for me.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So aim high. and this is the hard one, be ready to walk away. If you are given an offer and you're not getting what you need or want, if the culture is such that you're shot down and not given an opportunity to present your counter offer, if there is any kind of icky feeling like they're insulted that you've given a counter offer, just walk away. And that's hard to do. It's very hard to do, especially if you're putting food on the table. So it's one of those, you have to be judicious. But if you're getting cold feet, I had a client recently in the DC area who took a job, and I told her, and she was in one of our courses, so I said it publicly in front of like 10, 12 other women. I said, Gabriella, I think that you're walking into a minefield. I understand that you want to take this job, but I just think you're walking into a minefield. There are so many red flags here. And she just quit. She was there for 2 months. And I didn't remember saying it, but she showed me the recording when I said it. If you're feeling like that, do yourself a favor and spend a couple more months living more leanly and waiting for a better opportunity, because you have to go into every conversation knowing your worth and flipping that table around. Just remember that when someone's hiring or even just managing and trying to grow an internal team, they need you. The reason that they've brought you in is because they need someone to fill a need. And your job is to convince them that you are the solution to their problem. So they need you more than you need them. The conversation has to be that, a conversation, not an interrogation. So if you feel like the conversation, that the interview is becoming an interrogation and you're just getting thrown questions, turn it around, ask them a question. It's perfectly fine. Don't wait until the end of an interview to be given permission to ask a question. In the middle of the interview, so let's say Ingrid asked me a question about how I handle chaos, because it's a new company and they're kind of chaotic and things are changing, and I give a good answer. I might say to Ingrid, how does the chaos present here? What are your biggest challenges? What are the things that are really, what are the pain points that are coming out of this? And just turn it around. There's great power in shifting dynamics. And when you ask a question or turn it around on them, it's reminding them that you are a solution to them just as much as they are a solution to you. Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of this, for a lot of you, unless you're natural salespeople or actresses, is going to be really hard. And you're going to have to practice it, and you're going to have to fake it, and write scripts and memorize them. Here's another tip. Always go to an interview with a notepad, like a little portfolio, and you can pretend, have a pen. You're pretending you're writing notes. What you're really doing is you're scribbling and you're reading the reminders that you wrote to yourself of things that you want to make sure you don't forget to say. So have it written down. Have those stories that you want to tell. Have that sound bite you want to make sure you leave them with written down on your notes. And all you look is, wow, she's very thorough. She's taking notes. But really what you're doing is reading what you wrote to prompt yourself. That can be helpful, especially if you're coming into this kind of situation nervous. All right. Any other things I wanted to cover? Yeah, I think the last thing I can't do something like this. I mean, I have like gazillions of things I wanted to share, but I think if nothing else, let me teach you how to close, because I've been interviewing for over 30 years, and it's like a pathetic percentage of people who close me. Even when I was in tech and I was interviewing people for national account executive jobs when I wanted them to close deals all the time. So maybe 10% of the people I interview close, and maybe of that 10%, 10% of them are women. So it's like none. So this is the way you close out any interview. This happens when you're interviewing internally, when you're just negotiating for a raise with your boss, or you're interviewing for a job externally. You have the conversation. They usually ask you if you have any questions. Very important question. What are the next steps in this process? So let's say your boss says, well, you know what, Ingrid, I'm gonna see what I can do. You've asked for it, I'm gonna see what I can do. So what are the next steps in the process? Information is power. If you don't know what the next steps are in the process, you can't close. So let's say the next steps in the process, let's use the example of a new job. Well, Ingrid, I'm going to meet with my team on Friday. We're all going to bring the notes from our candidate interviews, and from the 25 or so we've interviewed, we're going to select 4 to move forward. Oh, great. So what's the next step after that? Well, they're going to interview with a team member and then have a panel interview with the group of managers. So now you've got the information, you know what you're aiming for. And then you say, and you look them right in the eye, and you say, Ingrid, based on our oh, goodness gracious, based on our conversations, hang on, I can't do it like this. Go on. Children are failing me. So, because here I am, like at the big moment. So, Ingrid, based on our conversation today, are you comfortable recommending me for that next step? And usually, well, it goes one of 2 ways. They will say, first of all, they'll be very surprised you asked. And it kind of puts them off guard, which is fantastic. It shows incredible confidence. And it can go either way. They're either going to say, actually, yeah, this is a great interview, and I will be recommending you. That's one way. Another way, it could be the total opposite. You know what, Ingrid? No, I'm just not feeling it. So now you have an opportunity to make her feel it. So step one is you clarify. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Empathize. I'm sorry to hear that, Ingrid. I clearly didn't do a good enough job of explaining kind of the connection. Is it, and you can either give her some options or ask her boldly, what is it about me that gives you pause? If you kind of know what it is, if you know that you're pivoting from insurance to technology, and that's the disconnect, then you could just say, is it the fact that this disconnect between our industries? Is that it? Yeah, it is. It actually is. Well, I'm so glad you said that, because I was thinking about that when I came in. So now I empathize. I get it. I know what it's like trying to look at alternative resumes and figure out how someone fits in. And then you're going to kind of refute it. But you know what? Your client base is insurance people, right? I read on your website that about 60% of your clients are big insurers because they use your software for claims management. So who better to help you market your product than someone who really understands how it's used in the marketplace? In my experience in managing teams, I could teach anybody an application or a program. It's really harder to teach a culture, a way of doing business. That takes a much more time. So can you see how maybe this is the testing for understanding part? Can you see how maybe that what you might have thought was a liability could be an asset? And then Ingrid could maybe say yes. But at least you're getting information, because if you leave there and she's still a no, at least you know. At least you're not walking out of there thinking, oh, I think I did really well. She told me that I might hear in a week. And now for the next week, you're like, okay, I think this is going to go. And then you're completely crestfallen in a week when you don't even hear from Ingrid, and you get a robo email saying you're not getting it, and you have no idea why. So if you think of this when you're making the close, because none of you will do it, not none of you, very few of you will do it. But I want you to. If you think of it this way, this is your pay. Think of all the work that goes into an interview. You have gotten a babysitter or a dog sitter. You've done days of research. You have, maybe gotten a blowout, or you're, bought something nice to wear, or whatever you're doing. You have invested time and resources, and your payback, all you're asking them for is information. That's it. If you walk out of an interview and you can't answer the question when you walk in the door, how'd it go, Mom? If you can't clearly articulate how it went, then you didn't close, and you might as well know nothing. So I think if I just teach anything, that's what I would like to teach. So yeah. And I'm happy if there are more questions.
Someone just popped a question in. Do you do individual coaching to help women who are transitioning to self-employment? I'm in a unique situation that I need help navigating as I transition out of my current position.
Yes, so I do. I have a limited schedule for private coaching, but she can find me at my website, or I'll make sure that I give them my email address to Angie when I give those freebies away. Okay. Yeah.
And someone popped your website into the chat. That's in there for everyone.
Yep. Great.
This has been awesome, Susan. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I'd be happy to come back.
It's just been
Yeah.
so informative. I've learned so much. I think everybody who listens,
Oh,
just
good. I'm glad. It was a lot. It was a
So-
lot of questions, and I'm really, really impressed with the questions.
I know.
You guys
They
kept
did
me on
all
my
the work,
toes.
so I didn't have to.
Yeah, you guys kept me on my toes. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. We appreciate you coming back, giving back to the college in this sort of a way with information that's valuable for all of this. So
Great.
to everyone who's still on, the alumni office is going to be sending some follow-up information. So just be looking for that. Thank you again, Susan.
Great.
Appreciate
You're welcome. Thanks for moderating, Ingrid. And take care,
expertise.
Angie and Emily. Bye-bye.